Welcome to our next unit in our discussion of building database-backed web applications. So in this lesson, I want to first start off by adding a new route. So adding a new handler that will allow us to display a single quote. Okay, so in the past, we have handlers that simply create a new quote and display all the quotes. What we want to do is to simply display one quote. Okay, so that's our task for this lesson. Okay, so of course we will need a function to do that. In our case, a method on the app, on the application struct. So before I do that though, let me go here to models, and I want to show you that we can create sort of a error message that will help us to return errors that are specific to our model. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and create a variable called error record not found. Okay, and this will be errors, errors that new. Then we simply put the error message models and no matching record found. Okay, all right, and so this is what we tend to do when you create a struct. We specify what error messages can be provided. Okay. Okay. All right. So that out of the way. All right. So again, that's in models, and I'll show you how to use this in a while. Now, with that out of the way, let's just go into our quotes.go and let's write our method. Okay. So we have an insert. All right. We have a read, and let's create one where we can get a single quote. Okay, so func, of course, it's going to be up. Well, sorry, not up. Q quote model. All right, and then get. Now, when we from our handler, when we call the get method, we will put the quote that we want. Okay, and so when you pass in the ID, remember, in our case, it will be quotation ID. All right, so if I come here, quote box, select quotation ID from quotations. Okay, so these are our current IDs. All right, so this is what we will provide, an actual ID for the quote. Okay, and after we provide the ID, then of course we will return that quote, right? Or specifically a pointer, okay, to that quote, all right? Because we don't want to pass a copy. We want to pass the address of the actual code, okay, which makes it easier to work with, and we don't need to be copying, especially if the um, the struct is very large, right? So if you could imagine you have like 20 fields in here and they are huge, you don't want to be copying these. So what you do after you create it, right? So after you create the code, you simply pass it as a pointer. So the compiler doesn't have to be doing a lot of copying by value, right? We're passing by reference. Okay. Of course, I know you all know what it means for to be passed by reference versus passed by value. If not, you can do a quick Google search. Okay, and so our SQL statement is rather simple. Select author, name, category. What else? Quote. Okay. From quotations. Again, this is nothing new. You should be familiar. You should be completely following with what I am doing right now. Where quotation ID is $1. Right, so we use a placeholder. All right, with that out of the way, let's create an instance of our quote struct. Right, and so remember, to create an instance, we use the ampersand. Okay, so it's like I'm creating a new quote, right? So I could, instead of saying new, we put the ampersand. Okay, good. All right, so that's how we do that. All right, and so let's go ahead and run our query, and we will accept an error message. DB, that's our connection, and it's going to be query row. Okay, and then we need to pass, of course, S, and we need to pass the parameter for the $1, which will be ID. And then I'm going to go ahead and do our scanning. Okay, so that's scan. Okay, and then again ampersand q dot author name ampersand q dot category, and then ampersand q dot body. Okay, okay, so remember these come from our quote struct. Okay, oops. All right, so with that out of the way, we now need to check for any possible errors. All right, so again, after doing this, you get used to it. So after a while, building web applications it simply means that you have to design. Okay, you have to design and know what you should include in your web application, because writing the code sort of becomes repetitive, monotonous. So design is the most important thing after you learn how to build your web applications, or after you've built a couple of web applications. Okay, so if error not equal to nil, then let's check for the possible errors. So let's check to see if the user entered, so for example, if the user enters, let's say they enter 5 will not be found here, right? So there's no quote that has a quotation ID of 5. So we could simply check for that. And so we could say if errors that is, okay, so this errors that is function allows me to ask the compiler, ask Go, to check if this error was a specific kind of error. Okay, and so we're going to check to see if the error was an SQL error, no rows error. Okay, and so if we run this query row, right, and we check our database or table and we see that there is no matching quotation ID, then it will return a SQL.error no rows error, right? Meaning there was no row. So let's check for that. And so if that's the case, right, and that's why we use is. Can you tell me if this error that is returned is of this type? If it is, then I will simply return nil, okay, and then I will return the error message, but I will return my specific error message that I created, right? Models.error record not found, which is this one here, right? So it's a good message. So when somebody says, when we have models no matching record found, right, we know what that means. Okay, so I'm going to return my own error, right? Because I don't know what error no record. I don't know what this will actually return as a string. It could be some ugly message. All right. So I just wanted to return my own message. All right. So if it's not that error, then we will just return. Oops, why am I using M here? Should be Q. All right. Okay. Oh, actually, I did use M for all others, so that's my bad. M. All right, so I used M for all the others, so I'll have to keep that consistent. All right. So let's come back down here, and yeah, so if it's not a error no rows found error, then I will just return nil, all right, and the actual error, because in this case I have no idea what it is. So best to have the system tell me what it is. Now, if there are no errors, then of course we will skip this. All right, so we will skip that. And so it means that we have something that we can return. So we will return the Q, and then we will return nil since there are no errors. Okay, so that seems very straightforward. Again, you should know exactly what I'm doing here. Write the SQL code. I create somewhere to put the results. I get the results, I store them, and I check to make sure that there are no errors. And if there are no errors, it means that the results are valid and usable, so I can send them to the handler. Okay, so that's good, that's good. And so now I could actually use them in my handler. So if I have a handler, it simply means now I have to create a new route. So let me go to routes. Let me create a new route. Let's copy this and then let's give it a name, show dash quote. Okay, that's our new route, show that quote. Right. this will allow us to see one quote. And the handler will be named show quotation. Okay, show quotation. Show quotation. Okay, let's save that. So the last thing we need to do is to go to our handlers and actually write the handler. All right. So again, after a while, things become sort of boring or monotonous. Right? And this is the reason why I talk about always ensuring that by refactoring your code, it becomes easy to add more routes, to add more handlers. All right. Okay. And let's go ahead and do that. So func, it's on application, of course. Let's call it show quotation. And of course, it will take a HTTP that response writer. All right, that's how we respond. And of course, we will get a request, which is HTTP that request. Okay, so this is a request that the user has sent. So whenever we need to create a handler, Go gives us access to our response object and the request object. Okay. Now in this case, we will need something that is in the request object. All right. And so the thing that we need from the request object is actually what is the ID that the user is asking for. And so to do that, I'm going to use the string convert function, which will take what the user types in and convert it to an integer. Okay, because that's what our get function is expecting. And where will we get this number from? We will get it from the URL, as you will see. And so I want to get ID. Okay, good. I'll show you how this works in a while. So of course, we have to check again. So if error not equal to nil, or if ID is less than 1, right? We don't want any. Remember, Postgres begins at 1. Okay, so if the user enters something that's less than 1, automatically we know it's an error. And so we'll simply say app that not found, and we'll pass the response writer. Okay, so assuming that the user did enter a correct number, then what if the user enters like 5 and I need to return, right? Remember to return because it will continue, right? So we don't want it to continue, we want it to simply stop. That's what the return does. There's an error, let's exit. Okay, now assuming there are no errors, and it's a value greater than 1, then now we can send that to our get method. So app that quotes, right, that get, and we will simply pass ID. Okay, and we will get back a response. Okay, of course we need to check that response. So if again, this will look familiar. If error not equal to nil, then we need to do a couple checks. We need to check to see if it's a other error, or if it's a no row found error. Okay, so if, again, errors that is, okay, models that not, right? So if it's an error which means that there were no records found, then we know we will simply say app that not found, right? Which makes sense. Otherwise, we know that it's some other kind of error, which would mean that something happened on the server, right? Something happened on the server. So app dot server error w and error. Okay, and then of course we will have to simply return because something happened. So we have to leave our handler return. Okay, so if everything works out, there are no errors, then we can go ahead and let's just simply print the quote as plain text. Of course, I could have created a template that would display this. Okay, but I won't do that because you already know how to do that. Q. Okay, so let's test this out. Okay, go run. Okay, let me start my Firefox, which is something I should have done earlier because it does take some time. Okay, so go run /cmd /web. Okay, so let me show you how I will do this. Well, I could say localhost, right? That still works. /show, that still works. If I want a specific quote, I'm going to say show quote, QUOTE. And then when you want to provide a parameter in a URL, then you use the question mark. So whenever your browser sees a question mark, it knows that there is some parameter that will come next. And so in our case, the parameter is ID. Okay, and after you place the parameter, you put an equal sign, no space, and then you provide what value it is. Let's say 5. Okay, we know that there is no 5, right? Okay, and so it says not found, which makes sense. Now let's put something valid. Record 11. Okay, so that's valid. So let's put 11. And what you'll notice is that we get the record. Of course, it's just plain text because we don't have a template. Okay, we could have easily put a template and execute the template. Okay, but I will leave that up to you. Okay, great. Now there's one thing I want to now discuss. So let's stop this. I want to now show you how we can use this idea of showing a single quote to be able to display our quote after we add it. Okay, so if I come up here to create a quote, okay, so create quote, I'm going to come all the way down here, okay, and I will not simply print that the row has been created. I will instead display the quote that was created. Okay, and that's very simple. Well, all I have to do is do a redirect. Okay, HTTP dot redirect. Remember, redirect means I want you to go to this specific URL. Okay, so after you reach on line 93, I want you to go to this URL. So the redirect expects the writer, it expects the reader, and it expects as a string the URL to go to. Now, we know how the URL looks like because we have been doing it. The URL will have show dash quote question mark ID equal and some number. Okay, so let's just make a string that has that format. And how do you do that? Well, you use the fmt dot sprintf. Okay, so we're making a formatted string, and so the string will be / show quote. Okay, we don't need to put the 4000 or the local host. No, we just put the actual the route for that particular handler. It needs a question mark, it needs the word ID, it needs an equal sign, and then we'll put modulus D, which will be replaced. And it will be replaced by whatever ID was returned to us. Okay. And the last thing we need to provide to the redirect is the code. And the code in this case will be HTTP that status, right, C other. Okay, so this is the code we tend to use when we do a redirect. Okay, remember in the earlier part of the semester, I showed you how we could redirect whereby we kept what was entered into the box, into the form. Okay, but this is just a general redirect. All right. Okay, so this is something that you'll do a lot, right? So make sure you understand the pattern, right? The response writer, the request, the URL to redirect to, and then the status code. Okay, so what's the benefit of this? Well, let's look at it. Okay, so let's run our web application again. Go run that / web / that's cmd. Oh, I got my commands wrong. Okay. Okay. And so I'm going to come here and I will add a quotation. So let's go to quote. Author will be me. Category will be, let's say, life. And the quote will be this is a great day to start reading a new book. Okay. So let me save this, and notice that when I save it, it actually redirects to that page, which gives me the quote. So no longer do I only have the ID, right? I actually have the quote. Again, if you use a template, then you could just have like the quote nicely formatted on the screen, right? Maybe the quote on one line. Underneath, you have the author, and you could even put the date at the bottom if you wanted. All right, great. So that's it for this lesson. We now have the ability to view a single quote, right? And by viewing a single quote, we have the ability to actually show that quote when we actually create it. All right, so I hope that made sense. This was not a very novel thing, right, compared to what we have learned previously. So it has just been putting some of the pieces that you've learned together, right? You already know how to do redirects, okay? You might not have known about how to provide values in the URL, right? But now you know. And of course, you already know how to create a handler, right? It's just that we created a new one. Where is that? Down here. We created a new one, okay, which allowed us to see a single quote. Of course, like I mentioned, this could probably have been a template instead of whatever, right? So we could have just created a template, right? Could have created a template. Of course, that's something you would do. And of course, I also mentioned that we could have our own error messages in our structs that we could call upon. And because we have refactored our code, the ability to add more methods, ability to add more SQL interaction or any more SQL operations is easier, right? So we don't have to do anything different. All we do, add a new method, right? And so it's pretty straightforward. Notice we didn't even have to touch main because we have refactored, all right? We have refactored. So again, nothing really complex, right? You know how to do all of this. And so I'm going to leave it here. Now, in the next lesson, we will look at a new topic. And so I'll see you in that one.